chaos at Kabul airport. The United States pauses its evacuation as thousands of Afghans spill onto the tarmac in a desperate bid to get on departing flights. This a day after the Taliban seizes control of the capital. Also coming up in the programme, the diplomatic fallout of the Western withdrawal. The UN Security Council starts its emergency meeting with reports of mounting human rights violations against Afghan women and girls. And in other world news, Lebanon inches closer to forming a government as the president and the prime minister designate meet today. This as anger in the country grows following a fuel tanker explosion that left 28 people dead. Well, those are our top stories this hour on France 24. Thank you for joining us. I'm Nadia Massi in Paris. And we start the programme this hour with the very latest from Afghanistan, this one day after the Taliban raised its flag over Kabul. Today there have been dramatic scenes at the city's airport, the only route out of the country not controlled by the militants. Commercial flights are not operating, and the United States has also paused its military evacuations because of safety concerns. This after thousands of people flooded the tarmac there trying to get on flights. Now, within the last few hours, it's also emerged that a US military commander has met face-to-face with the Taliban to seek what they're calling non-interference with those evacuations. Well, covering all of this for us today is our senior reporter, Catherine Norris-Trent. She sent us this.
We've got the confirmation that the US has paused its evacuation of its military flight, which have been evacuating US citizens, and those who'd managed to get visas to get out of Afghanistan were being flown out of the country on military planes. So that at the moment has been suspended because of the very chaotic and dramatic scenes at Kabul airport. Those pictures circulating widely on social media, of course, showing people clinging to the sides of US planes as they took off from the runway, and thousands of people out on the tarmac there. And of course, other pictures appearing to show some of those people falling to their deaths. Of course, extremely dangerous scenes there. So the US is trying to clear the runway, trying to clear the tarmac there before they resume evacuations. And then, of course, you've got other Western countries rushing to evacuate their nationals and Afghans who worked with them as well. Britain, France, other European countries, Australia as well. So that at the moment has been dominating the activity at Kabul airport. All commercial flights, charter flights have been suspended while the airport has been requisitioned for these military evacuations, which officials are hoping will get back underway again if security can be re-established at the airport.
It was Catherine Norris-Trent speaking to me a little earlier. Well, the UN Security Council is currently holding an emergency meeting on Afghanistan. Its Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, has been speaking. He said the UN has received what he called chilling reports of human rights violations by the Taliban. He is urging all parties on the ground to exercise restraint. Have a listen.
At this grave hour, I urge all parties, especially the Taliban, to exercise utmost restraint to protect lives and to ensure that humanitarian needs can be met. Conflict has forced hundreds of thousands from their homes. I also urge all countries to be willing to receive Afghan refugees and refrain from any deportations.
Well, for more, our US correspondent, Ketavan Gorjestani, is on the line. Ketavan, what more can you tell us about what's happening at the moment at that Security Council meeting?
Well, the words of the Secretary General were actually echoed by many of the representatives, the ambassadors who spoke after him during that Security Council. Most of them really reiterating those words and that worry, the worry about the humanitarian situation and the worry about human rights and how, according to them, the Taliban were already violating human rights, especially those of women and girls. And you had had representative after representative calling on the UN, calling on all the countries to do everything in their power to protect those Afghans still in the country, to protect civilians and especially women and young girls, to protect their rights. So that was one of the main concerns of this Emergency Security Council. The other concern that the Secretary General mentioned, as well as some other representatives, is the question of Afghanistan becoming once again a base, a safe haven for a terrorist. And that was something that the Secretary General touched upon. He said we have to do everything we can to avoid Afghanistan becoming once again that safe haven for terrorists. So you see really two main concerns for that group. The question of how civilians will be treated by the Taliban in Afghanistan, and how Afghanistan is going to possibly become once again a safe haven for terrorists in the years to come.
Ketavan, we've heard just a short while ago that the US President Joe Biden is to speak within the coming hours on the situation in Afghanistan. But until now, there's been a notable silence from the White House, hasn't there?
Yes, and this return of Joe Biden to Washington, because he is currently in Camp David, is something that was decided just now, because just a few hours ago, the White House was still saying that there was no change to the president's schedule. And you saw really the president coming under fire for not being in Washington, for not speaking about the situation in Afghanistan. And so we are going to hear from the U.S. president later on this afternoon here in D.C. But really, the position of the White House, of Joe Biden's team, has been to defend the decision, to reiterate that it was the right call to get those troops out. Even though the situation is unraveling in Afghanistan, we'll see what the president has to say about this decision.
Ketavan Gorjestani in Washington, thank you very much indeed. And as we've been reporting, Western states have been trying their best today to evacuate their nationals, but the Chinese and the Russian embassies are remaining open. And today, Moscow has said that its staff are in contact with the Taliban officials via its embassy there. This is all part of an upcoming battle for influence in Afghanistan, as Yuka Roya now reports.
The Afghan flag goes down in Kabul. As the Taliban declared the war over, a new battle, the fight for influence, got underway. China became the first major nation to flag support for the Taliban, saying it was ready for friendly relations.
阿富汗塔利班方面呢，多次表示希望同中方发展良好关系，期待中方参与阿富汗重建与发展，绝不允许任何势力利用阿富汗领土做危害中国的事情。我们对此表示欢迎。
The militants have already reassured China that they wouldn't host Uyghur militants from Xinjiang province that borders Afghanistan. Russia, meanwhile, says its diplomats are in contact with the Taliban to work out a permanent mechanism of ensuring safety for its embassy. The diplomatic charm offensives stand in sharp contrast to some Western powers scrambling to get their nationals out of Afghanistan. The United States sent 6,000 troops to the airport in Kabul to ensure the safe evacuation of its citizens. Amateur images show US military aircraft trying to control crowds of Afghans on the runway. While Joe Biden watched on from Camp David, the US government issued a joint statement along with more than 60 countries, calling for calm and the safe departure of foreign nationals and Afghans who want to leave.
The Afghan people deserve to live in safety, security and dignity. We in the international community stand ready to assist them.
France's ambassador has also left the country. The defence minister announced earlier that French citizens, as well as, quote, Afghans who had rendered service to the French armed forces, would be airlifted to safety. Tens of thousands of Afghans have left their homes to flee the violence. Some European countries are bracing for a possible refugee crisis.
Well, meanwhile, Germany has come under some criticism for the slow start of the withdrawal of its nationals from Afghanistan. Let's talk about that with our correspondent in Berlin, Emmanuel Schaz. Emmanuel, what can you tell us about the state of the German evacuations?
Well, it's not so much about evacuating German nationals. There's only a few dozen German nationals left in Afghanistan. The bigger question is also what will happen to local staff, to Afghan people who supported, who cooperated with the German army during the German army's presence in Afghanistan, which spans over nearly 2 decades. Germany, the German government, was criticized for not having started those evacuations earlier. In fact, as early as June, Annalena Baerbock, who's the candidate for the Greens at the next elections, had said that the Greens had actually asked the government to evacuate the Afghan personnel, the Afghan people who had worked for the Germans without success. This was denied by the Conservatives. This was denied by the majority at the government. So a lot of concern. And then finally, yesterday came the news that evacuations would start either late on Sunday or today. But because of the chaotic scenes we've witnessed at Kabul airport, well, the planes, the 2 military transport planes that were supposed to evacuate both German nationals and those hundreds of people, local staff which worked for the German army, well, those 2 planes could simply not land in Kabul. There was also a third plane, military plane, that was actually a medical plane that was supposed to land. It also couldn't arrive. And both Armin Laschet, who's the Conservative candidate to the Chancellery, and Angela Merkel highlighted the fact that, in fact, the EU would simply not be able to evacuate without the help of the United States.
Yeah, and you mentioned Armin Laschet there. He's been very critical of the NATO exit altogether. Let's have a listen to what he had to say a bit earlier today.
Gemeinschaft. Es ist evident, dass dieses Engagement der internationalen Gemeinschaft nicht erfolgreich war. Es ist das größte Debakel, das die NATO seit ihrer Gründung erleidet. Und es ist ein Epochenwechsel, vor dem wir stehen.
Yeah, damning words there, Emmanuel. What do you make of what we've just heard?
Well, Armin Laschet has also said that this was a political and a humanitarian disaster. He said that Germany had a moral obligation towards local staff that worked for the German army. So that's all words. That comes only weeks before the general elections, where he hopes to be elected chancellor. But those words were also followed by a lot of references to 2015, with Armin Laschet also saying that Germany should not be expected to welcome more refugees, and that Germany should not repeat the mistakes, he said, of 2015. So I would say political considerations at the moment come before humanitarian considerations here in Germany.
Emmanuel Chaz for us there in Berlin. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's turn now to some other world news on the programme, and to Lebanon, where the country's top political leaders say a government could be formed soon. This after a 10-month wait. Speaking today after a meeting with the president, the Prime Minister designate Najib Mikati said he thought he would be able to form a viable coalition government. Pressure is mounting on the country's leaders to agree that deal, this as Lebanon's economy goes from bad to worse. The local currency has lost about 90% of its value, and water and electricity are both scarce. Well, fuel is hard to access in Lebanon as well. And yesterday, a fuel tanker exploded in the north of the country. This was in Akkar. 28 people died. The victims had gathered to fill plastic containers with petrol. Sally Farhat tells us more.
Akkar's devastating fuel tank explosion left more than 28 dead and 79 injured. The reasons the explosion happened remain unclear. In terms of what we know, a fuel tank was found in Akkar al-Tlail prior to the explosion, at a time when Lebanon is facing extreme fuel shortages that are threatening people's lives and even putting hospitals at risk of shutdown. On Sunday early morning, residents from the area rushed to the location in order to take the fuel, and that was when the explosion happened. There are several circulating stories on how the explosion took place, but none of them are confirmed yet. Residents in the area have accused the landowner's son of shooting at the reservoir, which led to the explosion. The owner himself was arrested, but has claimed that he did not know what the tank included, given that he has previously rented the land out. And the owner, however, is actually backed by the Free Patriotic Movement, and the person who rented is also politically backed by MP Walid Baine. And the person who rented has actually been in jail for 4 months because he has been blamed or accused of fuel smuggling into Syria. So several speculations remain on why the fuel was stored there, and some news sources have even confirmed that the fuel was meant to be smuggled into Syria, actually.
Sally Farhat reporting from Beirut there. And that's a wrap for this news bulletin. Thank you for watching, and do stay with us.